In the midst of a raging medieval battle, a thunderous command echoes across the field.
Shield wall!
Instantly, Viking warriors move as one. Heavy round shields, scarred from previous clashes, rise up and interlock edge to edge. A unified wall of wood and iron forms in the blink of an eye. Behind this barrier, the Vikings transform into a single formidable unit, bristling with spears and blades thrusting out from the gaps between shields. Enemy arrows rain down, thudding into the wooden shields or ricocheting harmlessly off. The warriors hold firm, shoulders touching, knees bent, absorbing the impact as enemy soldiers crash against their shield wall. This is no chaotic mob of raiders now, but a disciplined phalanx of fighting men. In that moment, the tactical depth of the Viking shield wall reveals itself, an ancient strategy of unity and strength amid the chaos of medieval combat. The Viking shield wall, known as Skjaldborg, meaning shield fortress, in Old Norse, was a core battlefield tactic during the Viking Age. It was deceptively simple in concept. Warriors standing shoulder to shoulder in a tight formation, shields overlapping to present a continuous front. By closing ranks and aligning their shields, the Vikings created a human bulwark that was difficult for enemies to penetrate. Individually, a single shield can only protect so much of a body, but linked together, dozens of shields became a nearly impenetrable fence spanning the width of the battlefield. This formation allowed relatively lightly armored Norsemen to hold their own against larger or more heavily armed foes. It exemplified the idea that in unity there is strength. Tactically, the shield wall served as both defense and offense. On the defensive side, it was like a portable fortress. When an enemy army charged, the front ranks of Vikings crouched slightly and braced their round shields outward. Those immediately behind might press their shields over the top, creating layers of protection. This overlapping coverage could blunt the shock of a cavalry charge. Horses would instinctively shy away from a solid wall of shields and spear points. Chroniclers describe how shields rang under arrow volleys, with missiles clattering off the wall of wood like hail on a roof. It also nullified much of the effect of enemy archery. Arrows fired en masse either stuck into the thick wooden boards or glanced off, with very few gaps between men for the missiles to find. For the warriors within the formation, there was immense psychological comfort knowing that their flanks were guarded by their comrades' shields and that no one stood alone. Offensively, the shield wall could become a battering ram. At a signal or roar, the Viking line surged forward as one. The key was coordination. Every man had to step in unison to maintain the wall's integrity as they advanced. When the Vikings' shield wall smashed into an opposing line, the result was a grueling melee at the line of contact. Shields grinding against shields as weapons stabbed and hacked in tight quarters. Warriors shoved with their shoulders and shields, trying to knock enemies off balance or break their formation. In these desperate moments, a battle often hung in the balance until one side's will or cohesion gave out. Maintaining such a formation amidst the frenzy of battle was a true test of discipline and resolve. Each man in the front rank had to trust the comrades beside him to guard his flanks. If even one warrior faltered or fell, a gap would open, a fatal weakness that could be exploited in an eye blink by the enemy. Thus, a shield wall was only as strong as its weakest link. Leaders often positioned their best equipped and most experienced fighters in the front ranks. In Anglo-Saxon and Viking armies alike, the front line typically consisted of elite warriors clad in mail and armed with heavy two-handed axes. These seasoned fighters could cleave into the enemy with mighty blows, and their steadfast presence also helped anchor the morale of the troops behind them. Protected by the wall of shields, spear-armed men in the second rank would lean in and stab over the shoulders of the front line, aiming for the faces and legs of the foe. Just before the lines met, some in the second rank hurled spears or hand axes to break the enemy's charge, then braced for the impact. Historical accounts give vivid illustrations of the shield wall's strengths and weaknesses. At the Battle of Malden in 991, a Viking shield wall faced an Anglo-Saxon army. The Vikings held their formation, and when the English leader Byrhtnoth was cut down, the Saxon wall lost cohesion and the Vikings won the day. On the other hand, at Stamford Bridge in 1066, a hastily formed Viking shield wall initially withstood the English attack, even as legend tells of a giant Norse axeman briefly holding a narrow crossing alone. Yet once King Harald Hardrada fell and the English managed to flank them, the Viking wall collapsed into a rout. These battles showed that a shield wall could dominate a fight until a critical point. Often the death of a leader or a breach in the line caused it to crumble suddenly. The most famous shield wall engagement came at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. There, King Harold Godwinson's Anglo-Saxon army formed a massive shield wall atop a hill to face Duke William of Normandy's forces. The famous Bayeux Tapestry depicts this, showing a line of English shields like a fortress wall on the ridge. At first, the wall proved its worth. Norman infantry and cavalry charges were repeatedly repelled by the barrier of shields and the fierce Saxon defenders behind them. However, William adapted his tactics. Feigning retreat, he lured parts of the English line into breaking formation to pursue. With gaps now opening in the once solid wall, Norman knights and archers exploited the weakness. In the final crush, Harold was killed, legend says by an arrow in the eye. And without their king, the English shield wall buckled and collapsed. Hastings vividly demonstrated that even a superb shield wall, nearly impervious from the front, could be undone by trickery and loss of discipline. Keeping a shield wall intact under pressure required extreme discipline. Fatigue was a constant enemy. Holding heavy shields in place while shoving against foes would exhaust even veteran warriors. Communication along the line was difficult over the deafening din of battle, so each fighter had to trust his neighbors and maintain the formation almost by instinct. If one section of the wall faltered or a gap opened, panic could spread quickly. Once an enemy forced a breach, the cohesive front could disintegrate in moments, leading to a rout. Flanking maneuvers were another great threat. A shield wall was strongest head-on. If attackers managed to hit its side or rear, the wall's advantage vanished. Commanders tried to secure their flanks on terrain features like rivers or hills to prevent this. Opponents also sometimes tried to break a shield wall head-on by concentrating force at one point. The Vikings themselves had a word for one such tactic: the boar's snout, svinfylking, a wedge of warriors driven like a spear point to crack through an enemy line. If threatened with encirclement, the warriors could tighten into a defensive ring of shields, guarding every side in a last stand. Missile fire lobbed in high arcs also posed a problem, since shields mainly protected the front. Arrows or spears plunging down from above could strike the tightly packed fighters behind the front ranks. All these challenges meant that a leader had to pick the battleground carefully and keep his men disciplined. Otherwise, the shield wall's strength could turn to vulnerability. A comparison with the Greek phalanx highlights similarities and differences. Like a shield wall, the phalanx was a tight formation of infantry with overlapping shields, used by Greek hoplites, heavy spearmen, in antiquity. Hoplites carried large round shields and long spears, standing in ranks often 8 or more deep. When phalanxes collided, battles became a shoving match of shields and spear thrusts. The Viking shield wall was similar in concept, presenting a united front, but typically less deep and somewhat more fluid. Viking warriors did not wield spears as long as those of a hoplite, and they wore lighter armor. This made the shield wall a bit more flexible in close combat, whereas the phalanx relied on strict discipline and uniform equipment to maintain its solidity. Notably, both formations were strongest facing the enemy head-on and could be disastrously vulnerable if taken in the flank or rear. The Roman testudo, or tortoise formation, was another famous use of shields for a different purpose. Roman legionaries would lock their large rectangular shields together on all sides and overhead, creating a box-like shell to protect themselves, especially against arrows during sieges. The testudo was excellent for defense under missile fire, but made movement slow and hand-to-hand fighting impractical. On an open battlefield, Roman armies rarely stayed in testudo once close combat began. They would adopt looser formations to wield their swords effectively. In contrast, the Viking shield wall was a combat stance meant for direct engagement. It provided strong frontal protection while still allowing the warriors to strike at the enemy. In short, the testudo sacrificed offense for all-around defense, whereas the shield wall balanced protection with the ability to fight back in melee. It's also worth noting that the shield wall was by no means unique to the Vikings. Many ancient and medieval cultures employed similar formations. For example, a Sumerian carved stone stele from around 2500 BC shows soldiers aligned in a shielded line. And Byzantine manuals of the 6th century AD describe a formation called the fulcrum that closely resembled a shield wall. Essentially, whenever warriors had shields and faced a head-on assault, Standing together with overlapping shields was a natural solution. The Anglo-Saxons, of course, used shield walls against the Vikings, and even the Romans and Greeks at times fought in dense shielded lines. After the Viking Age, the shield wall gradually faded from European battlefields. The Norman triumph at Hastings showed that heavily armored cavalry and clever tactics could overcome a static infantry line. Over the next few centuries, warfare evolved. Shields became smaller or were abandoned altogether as infantry adopted two-handed weapons and wore better armor. By the High Middle Ages, knights on horseback dominated the battlefield, and foot soldiers had to find new ways to defend themselves. In many places, tight formations of pikes or polearms replaced the old shield wall. For example, the Swiss pike squares and Scottish schiltrons of the later medieval period created walls of spear points to stop cavalry. In regions like Scandinavia where cavalry was less prevalent, shield wall tactics persisted a bit longer, but eventually they too gave way as those armies modernized. The spread of powerful crossbows and longbows also made densely packed shield walls more dangerous to maintain. Missiles could cut down packed infantry and leave gaps. By the 13th and 14th centuries, the classic shield wall of Viking days was largely a thing of the past. Yet the legacy of the shield wall lived on. Its image persisted in legend and literature as a symbol of unity and bravery. The fundamental principle that soldiers who stand together present a far stronger defense than any could alone remained central to infantry tactics long after. One could argue that later formations like the dense ranks of pikemen, or even the line infantry of musket eras, drew on the same idea of mutual support, albeit without shields. Even today, echoes of the shield wall survive outside the military. Modern riot police, for instance, often advance in tight ranks with their shields locked together to form a barrier against crowds and projectiles. The technology and context are different, but the concept is directly comparable to the tactics of over 1,000 years ago. The fundamental lesson of the shield wall, that unity and discipline can triumph over raw individual prowess, remained a cornerstone idea in warfare long after the Vikings. The Viking shield wall remains one of history's most iconic and formidable battlefield formations, a testament to how discipline and unity can amplify the strength of ordinary fighters. Though warfare eventually moved past the shield wall, the sight of warriors standing firm, shields interlocked, endures as a powerful image of collective courage from a bygone age of warfare.